My beloved child. Do not move past these words too quickly. Pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear carries the weight of a secret that was never supposed to reach the light. Something has been waiting for you at the edge of understanding, something hidden behind closed doors, unfinished conversations, strange silences, and a decision that never made sense to your heart. You wondered why someone could love you so deeply and still hesitate when it came time to choose you completely. You wondered why every time the future became serious, an invisible wall seemed to rise between you. And tonight, in this story, that wall finally has a name. A DNA test. But the test itself is not the greatest revelation. What it uncovered is: there was a reason your soulmate was never allowed to marry you, and the people who fought hardest to keep the two of you apart are now sitting in stunned silence because the truth they thought they understood has turned against them. Listen carefully, beloved child, because this did not begin with a laboratory report. It began years before you ever looked into your soulmate's eyes. It began inside a family where appearances mattered more than truth, where certain stories were repeated so often that everyone eventually accepted them as fact, and where one older member of the family carried knowledge that nobody else possessed completely. Your soulmate grew up believing their family history was simple. Their father was their father. Their mother was their mother. Their relatives were exactly who they claimed to be. There were old photographs in drawers, names written inside family albums, stories told at holidays, and familiar faces around dinner tables. Nothing seemed unusual enough to question. Yet there had always been one strange rule. One subject nobody was allowed to discuss. Whenever your soulmate asked about a certain period from the family's past, the room changed. Voices became quieter. Someone changed the subject. Someone else suddenly remembered something they needed to do. And one particular relative would stare at your soulmate with an expression that looked almost like guilt. Your soulmate noticed it as a child but eventually learned not to ask. Years passed. Then you appeared. And the moment your soulmate mentioned you to the family, something happened that neither of you understood. The resistance was immediate. Too immediate. They had barely learned anything about you. They did not know the private conversations you shared. They had never seen the way your soulmate's face changed when your name appeared on their phone. They had never witnessed the calm you brought into moments when your soulmate felt overwhelmed. Yet someone in that family said something startling. No. Not, let's meet them. Not, take your time. Not, are you sure? Just no. Your soulmate laughed at first because they thought the reaction was absurd. But nobody else laughed. Then came the questions. Where exactly was your family from? What was your father's full name? What was your mother's maiden name? Where had your grandparents lived? Did your family know anyone from a particular town? Had you ever heard a certain surname before? The questions felt less like curiosity and more like an investigation. Your soulmate became defensive. Why does any of that matter? Again, silence. And then the oldest person at the table finally spoke. You cannot marry this person. Your soulmate's heart dropped. Why? The answer was vague. Because there are things you don't know. That sentence would follow your soulmate for months. There are things you don't know. But nobody explained what those things were. And beloved child, this is where the mystery became painful, because your soulmate did something you never fully understood. They pulled away. Not because their feelings disappeared. Not because another person suddenly became more important. Not because everything you shared had been false. They pulled away because fear entered the place where certainty had once lived. Imagine loving someone while people you trusted your entire life looked you in the eyes and insisted that marrying them could expose something terrible. Your soulmate demanded proof. None came. Only warnings. Trust us. Leave this alone. Some doors should stay closed. You don't understand what happened before you were born. And perhaps the most unsettling warning of all. If you marry this person, you may discover something neither of you can undo. That sentence frightened your soulmate. For a while, it frightened them enough to create distance. You felt that distance. You may have interpreted it as rejection. In this story, you watched warmth become hesitation. Plans that once sounded natural became uncertain. Conversations about tomorrow became shorter. Something had changed, yet nobody gave you the dignity of explaining what. And still, whenever your soulmate tried to walk away completely, something pulled them back emotionally. They remembered your voice. Your patience. The way you understood things they struggled to explain. They remembered moments when the connection between you felt strangely familiar, not because you had known one another before, but because being understood that deeply can feel like arriving somewhere the heart recognizes. That frightened the family even more. Because your soulmate was supposed to forget you. Instead, they began questioning them. One evening, after another argument at home, your soulmate finally confronted the relative who had been the loudest voice against the marriage. Tell me the truth. The relative looked away. No. I am not a child anymore. It doesn't matter. It matters if you're asking me to lose someone I love. Those words changed the room. Lose someone I love. The relative's expression softened for only a second. Then came a sentence your soulmate would never forget. You think this is about whether we like them. It isn't. Then what is it about? A long pause followed. And finally. Blood. Your soulmate froze. What do you mean, blood? The relative refused to explain further. But the word had already escaped. Blood. From that night onward, your soulmate began searching. Old records. Family names. Photographs. Birth dates. Places people had lived. At first, nothing connected. Then they discovered something unusual. Years before your soulmate was born, one of their parents had spent time in the same region where members of your extended family once lived. That alone proved nothing. But it was enough to deepen the fear. Your soulmate returned to the family. Is this why you're stopping us? No answer. Do you think we're related? The silence became the answer your soulmate feared. Not confirmation. But fear. And suddenly everything looked different. The questions about your grandparents. The obsession with surnames. The warning about blood. The refusal to explain. Your soulmate felt sick. For the first time, they wondered whether the relationship they cherished could carry a hidden biological connection neither of you knew about. That possibility was enough for the family to demand the marriage never happen. But there was a problem. Nobody had evidence. Only an old family secret. And the person who knew the complete truth refused to speak. Beloved child, understand what happened next. Your soulmate did not simply accept the story. Something inside them rebelled against it. Because pieces did not fit. If the family genuinely believed you were biologically related, why had nobody produced records? Why had they waited until marriage was discussed before becoming alarmed? Why did different relatives give slightly different versions of the past? And why did one elderly woman in the family begin crying whenever your name was mentioned? That woman knew something. Your soulmate could feel it. So one afternoon, they visited her alone. No parents. No siblings. No arguments. Just two people sitting across from each other with decades of silence between them. Your soulmate placed an old photograph on the table. Who is this? The woman's hands trembled. She knew the face immediately. Where did you get that? Answer me. The woman pushed the photograph away. I promised I would never talk about this. Your promise is destroying my life. Tears filled her eyes. Your soulmate leaned forward. Is this person related to me? The woman looked toward the window. Then she whispered. Not in the way you've been told. Those words changed everything. Your soulmate's breathing stopped for a moment. What does that mean? But the woman would not continue. She only said. If you want the truth, don't ask the family anymore. Test the blood. Test the blood. That was the moment the DNA test entered the story. Your soulmate left with their hands shaking. For days they told nobody. They researched quietly. They learned how DNA matching worked. They read about biological relatives, unexpected parentage, family tree discoveries, and people who had lived entire lives believing one story only to discover another. But your soulmate's deepest question was still about you. Were you related? Was that the reason the family had forbidden the marriage? Or had the family used one secret to hide another? The test was ordered. Then came the waiting. And waiting became its own kind of torment. Your soulmate would wake during the night and stare at the ceiling. One outcome could mean the family had been right to worry. Another could mean years of fear had been built upon a lie. They thought about calling you. Several times, your name appeared on the screen. Several times, their thumb hovered over the button. But what could they say? I'm waiting to find out whether the reason we were separated was hidden in our DNA. It sounded impossible. So they remained silent. And you remained on the other side of a mystery you had never created. Beloved child, sometimes the most painful distance between two people is not created by absence of love. It is created by missing information. When people do not know the truth, fear writes its own explanation. Your soulmate's family had lived inside one explanation for years. Soon, that explanation would collapse. The results arrived on an ordinary morning. No thunder. No dramatic warning. Just an email notification. Your DNA results are ready. Your soulmate stared at those words for nearly a minute before opening them. Their heartbeat accelerated. The page loaded. Ancestry estimates appeared first. Regions. Percentages. Genetic communities. But your soulmate ignored almost all of it. They went directly to the relative matches. Their eyes moved down the screen. Several distant cousins. Unknown names. Then a closer match. Much closer. Your soulmate frowned. They refreshed the page. The result remained. A name they recognized was missing. A relationship they had expected to see was not there. Instead, another match appeared with a percentage of shared DNA that made absolutely no sense according to the family story they had been told. Your soulmate sat motionless. Then whispered. No. They checked again. The numbers did not change. The DNA test had not revealed that you and your soulmate were related. It revealed something far more explosive. The person your soulmate had been raised to believe was their biological father. Was not their biological father. The room seemed to tilt. Every childhood memory rearranged itself at once. Every family photograph. Every birthday. Every story. Every resemblance someone had claimed to see. Every argument. Every secretive glance. Suddenly the warnings about blood had a completely different meaning. Your soulmate called the elderly woman immediately. She answered on the third ring. Did you do it? Your soulmate could barely speak. You knew. Silence. You knew all these years. The woman began crying. Your soulmate's voice cracked. Who is my father? And beloved child, the answer was the reason the family had fought so desperately to prevent your marriage. The elderly woman said a name. Your soulmate did not recognize it at first. Then she explained. Years ago, your soulmate's mother had been involved with someone the family considered unacceptable. The relationship was hidden. There had been pressure. Arguments. Threats of disgrace. The young couple was separated. Soon afterward, the mother discovered she was pregnant. But by then the man was gone. And another man, someone approved by the family, eventually agreed to raise the child as his own. A new story was created. The past was buried. Your soulmate grew up inside that story. But years later, when you entered their life, your surname, your family's region, and certain details triggered an old fear. Because the biological father's family had once lived near members of your extended family. The older relatives panicked. They feared you might somehow belong to the same bloodline. Instead of revealing the original secret, they chose the easier path. Stop the relationship. Stop the marriage. Make your soulmate believe the danger was you. Because exposing the truth would mean admitting that the foundation of your soulmate's identity had been altered before they could even speak. Your soulmate listened in disbelief. So they ruined my relationship because they were afraid? The elderly woman whispered. They were afraid of what you would discover if you started asking questions. But are we related? I don't know. That answer was not enough. Your soulmate needed certainty. And this is where the story took another turn. Because the DNA database allowed relative comparisons. Your soulmate had your family information. Enough names had been researched. Enough records could be cross-checked. And eventually the conclusion became clear. There was no biological relationship between you and your soulmate. None that would have prevented marriage. The family's greatest fear had been wrong. But instead of relief, your soulmate felt anger. Because suddenly they understood the cost of the secret. The sleepless nights. The distance. The conversations that ended too soon. The way you had probably questioned your own worth. The future both of you had stopped discussing. All because people who were afraid of yesterday had interfered with tomorrow. Your soulmate went home carrying printed DNA results. The family was gathered that evening. They had no idea what was coming. Your soulmate walked into the room and placed the papers on the table. Nobody spoke. One relative glanced down. Then looked up immediately. What is this? You know what it is. The mother went pale. The man your soulmate had always called father stared at the paper but did not touch it. Then your soulmate asked the question that shattered decades of silence. Why did all of you let me believe I couldn't marry the person I loved when you knew you didn't even know the truth? The mother began crying. Someone said. We were protecting you. From what? No answer. From them? Or from finding out what you did? That question landed differently. Because everyone knew the answer. The family had not only been protecting your soulmate. They had been protecting themselves. Protecting reputations. Protecting old choices. Protecting a carefully constructed history. Protecting the comfort of not having to explain what happened decades ago. And beloved child, sometimes truth does something remarkable when it finally enters a room built upon silence. It does not need to shout. It simply stands there. And everything false begins falling around it. Your soulmate pointed toward the DNA report. We are not related. The mother looked up sharply. What? I checked. Another relative leaned forward. Are you sure? Yes. The room became completely still. The very argument that had been used to keep you apart had disappeared. Your soulmate continued. You told me marrying this person could destroy the family. But the truth is, you were afraid marrying them would make me investigate the family. Nobody could deny it. Then your soulmate said something nobody expected. You made them feel unwanted for something they had nothing to do with. That was when the mother covered her face. Because she understood. This was no longer only about DNA. It was about consequences. You had been judged without being heard. Your family had been quietly investigated. Your soulmate had been frightened into doubting a relationship that had once felt certain. And all of it had happened because older wounds had never been confronted honestly. Yet something still remained unexplained. The identity of the biological father. Your soulmate looked toward their mother. I want his full name. She refused. You already know enough. No. I know that the life I was told was mine was incomplete. Please. His name. The man who had raised your soulmate finally spoke. Tell them. The mother looked at him. There was no anger in his voice. Only exhaustion. Tell them everything. She cried harder. Then slowly, she said the name. Your soulmate wrote it down. That night, they searched online. At first, very little appeared. An old business listing. A record connected to another state. A photograph from years ago. Then your soulmate found an obituary. The biological father had died several years earlier. Your soulmate stared at the screen. There would be no confrontation. No dramatic meeting. No opportunity to ask why. But the obituary listed surviving relatives. A sister. 2 sons. A daughter. And one name made your soulmate freeze. Because they had heard it before. Not from their family. From you. It was the name of someone your family had mentioned casually in a story months earlier. For a terrifying moment, the old fear returned. Your soulmate thought. What if the family was right after all? So the research continued deeper. Records were compared. Dates were checked. Family trees were mapped. And eventually another truth emerged. The person mentioned by your family was not a blood relative. It was a longtime family friend whose connection had been mistaken for kinship by the older generation. That misunderstanding had fueled everything. One assumption. One hidden affair. One false paternity story. One familiar surname. And years of fear. Your soulmate sat back from the computer and laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the absurdity was overwhelming. The obstacle had never truly existed. The wall between you had been built from secrets and assumptions. But now it was gone. Or so your soulmate thought. Because the next morning, a message arrived. It came through the DNA platform. From an unknown match. Hello. I believe we may be closely related. I saw your profile and need to ask you something. Does the name on your family tree belong to your mother? Your soulmate stared at the message. Then responded cautiously. Yes. Who are you? The reply came quickly. I think we need to speak privately. A phone call was arranged. The stranger introduced herself as the biological father's daughter. Your soulmate's half-sister. For the first time, your soulmate heard the voice of someone who shared blood they had never known existed. The conversation was emotional. Confusing. Strangely comforting. They compared details. Birth years. Locations. Old photographs. The resemblance was undeniable once they knew where to look. But then the half-sister asked. Why did you take the DNA test? Your soulmate hesitated. Finally they explained. I wanted to marry someone. My family stopped it because they believed there could be a blood connection. The woman became quiet. What is the person's family name? Your soulmate told her. Silence. Longer this time. Then the woman whispered. I know that name. Your soulmate's stomach tightened. How? My father used to mention someone from that family. The fear returned instantly. Who? She gave a first name. Your soulmate recognized it. Someone from your extended family history. The connection suddenly seemed closer than expected. Your soulmate gripped the phone. Were they related? The woman said. I don't know. But I have my father's old documents. There may be something in them. That evening, she searched through boxes that had remained untouched since his death. Letters. Receipts. Photographs. Documents. Your soulmate waited beside the phone. Hours passed. Then a photograph arrived. Two young men stood beside an old car. On the back were handwritten names. One belonged to your soulmate's biological father. The other belonged to a man from your family's past. Not brothers. Not cousins. Friends. Close friends. And suddenly the mystery began making sense. The biological father had known your family. That was why names overlapped. That was why towns overlapped. That was why older relatives panicked when they heard who your soulmate wanted to marry. They had remembered fragments and assumed the worst. But the DNA showed no forbidden blood relationship. Your soulmate felt a wave of relief unlike anything they had experienced. Then the half-sister sent another photograph. This one changed the emotional meaning of everything. It showed your soulmate's biological father standing beside the same family friend many years later. Written beneath it were 5 words. Some promises survive every distance. Your soulmate asked what it meant. The half-sister did not know. But among the documents was a letter. A letter written by the biological father. Never sent. The paper had yellowed with time. The handwriting was uneven. And inside it was a confession. He wrote about the person he had loved, your soulmate's mother. He wrote about being forced apart. He wrote about discovering years later that she had given birth. He suspected the child might be his. He wanted to return. But he was told the child had a stable family and that revealing himself would destroy everything. So he stayed away. Then came the line that broke your soulmate's heart. If my child ever finds me, tell them I did not stay away because I did not love them. I stayed away because everyone convinced me my presence would cause more pain. Your soulmate read it again. And again. Because those words mirrored their own story with you. Stay away because love might cause pain. Walk away because the family says it is safer. Accept distance because people insist closeness will destroy something. History had repeated itself. A generation earlier, 2 people had been separated by fear. Now your soulmate had nearly allowed the same thing to happen again. And beloved child, that realization became the turning point. Your soulmate stopped asking, why did this happen to me? They began asking, what will I do now that I know? That is where courage begins. Not when the past disappears. But when the truth becomes stronger than the fear inherited from it. Your soulmate returned to the family once more. This time, they did not bring questions. They brought a decision. Everyone gathered. Your soulmate placed the old letter beside the DNA results. Then said, I am done allowing secrets from before I was born to choose the person I am allowed to love. The mother lowered her eyes. Nobody interrupted. I understand why you were afraid. I understand why you thought there might be a connection. But you never checked. You never asked. You simply decided that destroying my relationship was easier than exposing the truth. The man who had raised your soulmate looked deeply hurt. Your soulmate turned toward him. And you are still my father. His eyes filled with tears. DNA doesn't erase what you did for me. But love also doesn't require me to pretend the truth never happened. That sentence changed him. He nodded slowly. For years, perhaps he had feared that if the secret came out, biology would erase the bond he had built. Instead, honesty gave the bond a new foundation. Then your soulmate turned toward their mother. "I forgive you for being afraid." She looked up. "But forgiveness does not mean I will repeat your fear." The mother began crying again. And then your soulmate said your name. For the first time, nobody objected. Nobody shouted. Nobody warned them. Because the old argument was gone. The DNA evidence had dismantled it. Your soulmate continued. "I love this person. And if they still want me after everything my silence put them through, I will not run again." Beloved child, imagine the weight of those words. Not a fantasy of perfect love. Not a promise that nothing painful ever happened. A decision made after truth. A decision made after fear. A decision made after consequences had become impossible to ignore. Your soulmate left the house and sat inside their car. They picked up their phone. Your name was still there. They opened your conversation. Old messages appeared. Little jokes. Ordinary check-ins. Promises. Questions. Moments when you had tried to understand what was happening. One message stopped them. Something you had sent during the period when they were pulling away. You had written words that, in this fictional story, meant more now than when you first sent them. "If there's something you're afraid to tell me, I'd rather hear the truth than lose you to silence." Your soulmate stared at it. Then they cried. Because that had always been the answer. Truth. Not disappearance. Not family pressure. Not assumptions. Truth. Their fingers moved toward the keyboard. They typed. "I need to tell you everything." Deleted it. Typed again. "The reason they wouldn't let me marry you has finally come out." Deleted that too. Nothing seemed big enough. Nothing could contain the DNA test, the hidden father, the old photographs, the family panic, the letter, the misunderstanding, and the fact that the supposed biological obstacle between you had never existed. So your soulmate did something simpler. They called you. Your phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. And when you answered, neither of you spoke immediately. Your soulmate heard your breathing. You heard theirs. Finally, your soulmate whispered your name. There was something different in their voice. No avoidance. No carefully constructed distance. No family member standing behind the decision. Just emotion. "I found out why they stopped us." You remained silent. Your soulmate continued. "They thought we might be related because of something they hid about my birth." Your heart would have tightened hearing those words. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "We aren't." A pause. "The DNA test proved we aren't." Your soulmate could hear you trying to process it. Then they said. But that's not all it revealed. And they told you. Everything. The false paternity. The biological father. The half-sister. The photographs. The old friendship between the families. The mistaken connection. The unsent letter. The fear that had traveled from one generation into another. You listened. Perhaps part of you felt relief. Perhaps another part felt anger. Perhaps you wondered why nobody trusted you enough to tell you sooner. And your soulmate did not demand immediate forgiveness. They said something more important. "I should have trusted you with the truth, even when I didn't understand it myself." That mattered. Because reconciliation without accountability is only another form of avoidance. Your soulmate understood that. "I can't undo the way I pulled away. I can't give you back the nights you spent wondering what you had done wrong. But I can tell you now that you were never the problem." There was silence again. Then you asked the question your soulmate feared most. Why should I believe you won't run the next time your family is afraid? Your soulmate closed their eyes. This was the real test. Not DNA. Not ancestry. Character. And they answered. Because I finally understand that love cannot survive if I keep giving other people authority over truths they refuse to explain. You did not immediately promise anything. You did not need to. This was not about rushing toward a perfect ending. It was about two people finally standing in the same truth. Your soulmate asked to see you. And eventually, you agreed. When the meeting happened, there were no dramatic crowds. No orchestra. No family watching from a distance. Just you and your soulmate facing each other after everything that had happened. For several seconds, neither moved. Your soulmate looked different. Not physically. Something in their expression had changed. They had spent weeks confronting an identity they thought was certain. They had discovered a father they never knew. Siblings they never knew existed. A family secret older than their own memories. And yet standing before you, one truth felt clearer than all the others. They had almost lost you because they had been afraid to ask the right questions. Your soulmate stepped closer. I brought something. They handed you a copy of the DNA report. Not because you needed scientific proof of love. But because you deserved proof that the accusation hanging over your relationship was false. You looked through it. Then at them. So this was it? This was what they were afraid of. And they were wrong? Yes. You exhaled slowly. Then your soulmate handed you the old photograph of their biological father beside your family's longtime friend. You recognized the second man. Stories you had heard as a child suddenly made sense. He had not been a relative. He had been a close friend treated like family. Years later, memories blurred. People assumed connection meant blood. And nobody checked before fear became a verdict. Your soulmate said quietly. Our families weren't connected the way they thought. You looked at the photograph again. So we lost all that time because of a misunderstanding? Your soulmate's eyes filled. Yes. That answer hurt. But it also freed you. Because the mystery finally had boundaries. You had not been rejected because you lacked value. You had not failed some invisible test. You had walked into the unfinished history of another family. And beloved child, this is where the spiritual heart of this fictional message becomes clear. Not every closed door means you were unworthy to enter. Sometimes people close doors because they are frightened by what lies behind them. Not every person's hesitation is evidence that you were difficult to love. Sometimes people inherit fears they have never examined. And not every delay means the destination was wrong. Sometimes the delay exposes what would otherwise have remained hidden. The DNA test did not create the truth. It revealed what had already been true. That distinction matters. Truth existed before anyone had courage to face it. Your soulmate looked at you and said, I don't expect everything to go back to the way it was. You answered softly. It can't. They nodded. I know. Then you said something that surprised them. Maybe it shouldn't. Your soulmate looked confused. You continued. If anything happens between us now, it can't be built on what we were before. Too much happened. They swallowed. But maybe it can be built on what we know now. For the first time that day, hope entered their expression. Not certainty. Hope. And hope was enough. Weeks later, the family requested to meet you. This time, not to interrogate you. To apologize. You almost refused. Part of you felt they had no right to ask for your presence after judging you from a distance. But eventually you agreed, not because they deserved immediate comfort, but because you deserved to walk into the room without carrying the shame they had once tried to place upon you. The atmosphere was completely different. The same people who once demanded separation could barely meet your eyes. Your soulmate sat beside you. Not across the room. Beside you. That detail mattered. The mother spoke first. "We owe you an apology. You listened. We were afraid that an old family situation meant you two shared blood somewhere in the family tree." She paused. "We should have investigated before making assumptions." You replied. "You should have told us." She nodded. "Yes. No excuses. No dramatic justification. Just yes." Then the man who raised your soulmate spoke. "I was afraid of losing my child if the truth came out." Your soulmate reached toward him. "You didn't lose me." His voice broke. "I know that now." Something softened in the room. Not everything was healed. But honesty had finally replaced secrecy. Then the elderly woman who had first suggested the DNA test entered carrying a small envelope. She walked toward your soulmate. "I kept one more thing." Everyone looked at her. The mother seemed surprised. "What?" The elderly woman handed over the envelope. Inside was another letter from the biological father. This one was shorter. It had been written years after the first. Your soulmate unfolded it carefully. The letter contained no new scandal. No hidden biological twist. Instead, it contained a request. "If my child ever learns the truth, please tell them not to inherit our fear. We let too many people decide what love was allowed to look like. I hope they choose differently." Your soulmate stopped reading. The room was silent. Even the mother began to cry. Because suddenly the story had completed a circle. A man who had once been separated from someone he loved had unknowingly left advice for a child who would one day face the same pressure. Choose differently. Your soulmate looked at you. You looked back. And beloved child, that was the moment the decision became clear. Not because a mystical force removed free will. Not because love guarantees a perfect future. But because two people finally understood the pattern they had been invited to repeat, and decided not to repeat it. Months passed. Trust was rebuilt slowly. That matters. Real emotional repair is not created by one dramatic conversation. Your soulmate learned to communicate before fear became silence. You learned that forgiveness did not require pretending the hurt never happened. The family learned that protecting a secret can sometimes cause more damage than revealing it. And the DNA report that once seemed terrifying became something unexpected. A document of liberation. It gave your soulmate a biological truth. But more importantly, it forced an emotional truth into the open. The person who raised them was still family. The biological father was part of their story even though he was gone. The newly discovered half-siblings became relationships your soulmate could explore at their own pace. And you were never the forbidden person the family had imagined. Eventually, the conversation about marriage returned. But this time, it sounded different. Your soulmate did not ask the family whether they were allowed. They informed them of a decision made thoughtfully between the two of you. There was no screaming. No warning about blood. No mysterious resistance. The same family that once sat in shock around a DNA report now understood that their fear had nearly recreated the tragedy they had spent decades trying to hide. And when your soulmate finally stood before you and spoke about the future, they said, "I used to think choosing you meant choosing against my family." They paused. "Now I understand choosing honestly is not choosing against anyone." You took their hand. And for perhaps the first time, neither of you felt like you were fighting the past. The past had been named. Examined. Understood. It no longer needed to control the room. Beloved child, remember the deeper message hidden inside this fictional story. There will be moments when another person's confusion tempts you to question your worth. Do not confuse their unfinished history with your identity. There will be times when a delay feels like rejection. Do not assume you know the entire story while important truths remain hidden. There may be people who genuinely care and still make decisions from fear. Understanding their fear does not mean surrendering your future to it. Love needs discernment. Love needs truth. Love needs courage. And sometimes courage is simply refusing to let an unverified story become a permanent sentence. The family had believed blood would separate you. Instead, DNA exposed the secret that had been separating everyone. They thought the test might prove the relationship impossible. Instead, it proved their assumption wrong. They feared the truth would destroy the family. Instead, truth gave the family its first opportunity to know one another honestly. And your soulmate? They finally understood why they had been told never to marry you. Not because heaven had forbidden the connection. Not because you carried something dangerous. Not because you were secretly unworthy. They were forbidden because a family carrying an old secret saw echoes of its own past and panicked. They mistook familiarity for biology. They mistook secrecy for protection. They mistook fear for wisdom. And for a while, your soulmate believed them. Until truth entered the story. So if you have ever stood outside a closed door wondering what was wrong with you, let this story leave you with something stronger than suspense. Sometimes the answer is not hidden inside your shortcomings. Sometimes the answer lives inside a story that began long before you arrived. And when that story finally comes into the light, you may discover that the burden you carried was never yours. The accusation was never yours. The secret was never yours. The fear was never yours. You were simply standing close enough to the truth that people who feared it tried to push you away. But truth has a strange way of surviving locked rooms. It survives whispered warnings. It survives old photographs. It survives changed surnames. It survives carefully rehearsed family stories. It survives decades of silence. And sometimes it waits inside something as small as a DNA result until one person finally has the courage to look. That person was your soulmate. The screen showed them where they came from. The family confession showed them what had been hidden. The old letters showed them what fear had cost the generation before them. And your presence showed them what they could still choose differently. The family was shocked. Your soulmate was shaken. You were finally given the explanation you deserved. But the greatest revelation was not about genetics. It was this. A hidden past can explain the road behind you, but it does not have to decide the road ahead. Your soulmate had spent too long living beneath a sentence written by people who were afraid. Now that sentence had been erased. Not by fantasy. By truth. And as the two of you stepped away from the mystery that had controlled so much of your connection, your soulmate looked back only once. Not at the DNA report. Not at the family home. Not at the photographs. At the old letter. Choose differently. Those words had crossed years to reach them. And this time, they listened. Your soulmate reached for your hand. You did not need to know every detail of tomorrow. You only needed to know that tomorrow would no longer be built upon yesterday's lie. The door that had been closed was open. The reason you had been forbidden was exposed. The family knew the truth. And the person who once allowed fear to pull them away from you was finally standing beside you without hiding. Not because the past had vanished. Because it had lost its power to choose for them. And in the quiet after every secret had finally been spoken, your soulmate understood the one truth no DNA test could ever measure. Blood can reveal where a story began. But courage decides how the story ends.